And now I'd like to pass over to Olivia, who's going to deliver a webinar on trees.
Okay, so I'm Olivia. I'm a Tomorrow's Natural Leader at Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. So that's kind of a conservation placement where they want to give young people skills to get into the green sector. And as part of that placement, I've done a few training sessions on trees, but I have to say now that I'm not an expert. I don't know everything. I'm going to focus this one mostly on leaves because that's what we're going to be seeing when I get to the ID bit. But in winter it will be different. There will be lots of buds to look out for, but I've not included them at the moment. So just an overview. I'm going to talk about what are trees, some life cycle stuff, and then go on to some ID stuff, and then I've got a little quiz at the end. Right, let's hope this works. Okay, what do you think is a tree? Do you want to give me some things that makes a tree?
Wood, perhaps?
I suppose. Yeah, that is part of it actually. Yeah, like a woody stem. Anything else? No? Okay. So they are plants. They use sunlight and water, so they photosynthesize to make food and release oxygen. They have woody stems. They are perennial, so they live for many years. And they are above 4 meters generally, which separates them from shrubs and bushes. So a shrub is basically just like a mini tree. And a bush is like when the leaves are almost touching the ground. Okay, so why are trees important? Do you have any guesses?
Habitat, perhaps?
Yeah, so I've given you some clues there. So they act as homes for a lot of things. Anything else?
They oxygenate the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they obviously they photosynthesize, so they release oxygen, which is great for us, and they also take in carbon dioxide, which is particularly useful in this current day. So they act as homes, habitats, so they can act as homes for mammals, birds, insects. There's a whole variety of animals and other things that live on or in trees. They provide materials, so they're really useful for humans. They provide wood, fuel, paper, all those kind of things. And then I've put this one in here, which I think is really interesting, and I learned a little bit about at uni. So they tell us about past environments. So we can look at growth rings, and not only does that tell us the age of a tree, it also shows us the conditions that a tree's been through. So if a particular year has been really good, for example, quite wet and quite sunny, then the growth ring will be bigger because the tree's grown more in that year. And then we can also see if a year's had drought, because the growth ring will be a lot smaller. And you can also look at the chemical the chemical composition in those growth rings and see what the environment or the atmosphere was like during those times. So that's really interesting, I think. Here's a nice life cycle. It's quite confusing because there's seedling and then there's sapling. So that's one that sometimes I'll get mixed up. So you've got conception, so that's when we get pollen in the female part of the tree. And then we get a seed, and that needs the right conditions to sprout. Then you get a little seedling, and then you get a sapling, which is like a mini tree, and then an adult. And I thought this was quite interesting, is that when it's dead, it's just called a snag. So that's quite cool. So as I'm sure you're aware, there are different types of trees. Some trees are deciduous, so a lot of people often wonder what happens to leaves in winter. Why do they lose their leaves? And a way to answer that is saying what are leaves used for? So leaves are used to take in sunlight and produce biomass, essentially, for the plant so that it can grow. And they also use water to help with that. And then in winter, what changes is there's less sunlight and water can freeze. So there's not really that opportunity to grow. So we don't really need the leaves. They're a waste of energy, essentially. And they change colour because as the leaf breaks down, there's chemicals within the leaf that the tree breaks down before it sheds the leaf because they're useful chemicals. So on this slide, so that just kind of explains it. I'm not going to read out the tiny little things, but essentially you get chlorophyll, and that's green. Then that gets broken down into carotenoids and flavonoids, and then you get just carotenoids, and then you get anthocyanins, which are red. However, I should say that there is a evolutionary biologist who is sadly not with us, called Bill Hamilton. My lecturers raged about him. They considered him the Darwin of the modern age. He had a very different view of it, and because obviously not all leaves, which I will talk about on one of our trees, change colour, and it's a lot of energy for a tree to spend to shed its leaves. Why does it not just keep them on? And he thinks it was something to do with, or he thought it was something to do with the red around the tree as a warning. So over the winter, it almost protects the tree because the colours around show that it's like warning things to stay away. But that's just a theory, so but it's quite interesting. Okay, so the other side to that are evergreen trees, and these do not lose their leaves because of winter. They have different leaves because of that. So a deciduous tree will have flat, broad leaves adapted for soaking up sunlight. An evergreen tree will have really strong leaves that are rolled up tight or very waxy, and that's for storing water. That's their adaptation. So the leaves on these trees don't fall off because of the season, but they can fall off, and that's usually to do with predation. So if they get really badly nibbled, then the tree will just get rid of it. Okay, so that was just a quick thing about trees, and then I'm just going to go on to some species. I can't remember how many I've done. Not all the most common ones are on here, but I've done ones that generally we're likely to see, but also likely not to know. But I have thrown in a few like obvious ones. So I've given you guys some hints here again, and I just wondered if you've got any idea what we can use to ID trees.
Well, I suppose leaf shape is the obvious one.
Yeah, so leaves. Anything else?
The bark on the tree.
Yeah, I think bark's actually a really good one. There's certain trees that I really, really like the bark, and I think it's really pretty. But yeah, so leaf, flowers. This one, I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'll tell you what it is in a bit. But that is a fungus. And that picture is basically just to say like things that are associated with it. That's a lot of the time how we can decide what it is as well. That's the buds, the seeds, bark, and location. It's that one. Okay, so can we guess what this one is? Easy one to start with.
An oak, quercus.
Yeah, oak tree. So I am not going to even try and pronounce these scientific names. But yeah, so English oak, obviously lobed leaves, that's kind of really distinctive. Acorns, and this sounds weird, but to me they just look drunk. Like they're often kind of like they're not very elegant, I would say. Like they often look a bit meh, but I think they're really, really pretty. Yeah, so they're quite long-lived. They can live up to 150 to 250 years. The bark is quite distinctive. It's very ridged and jagged. There is another oak in the UK called the sessile oak, and the way to know the difference is that the English oak doesn't have leaf stalks, so the leaf is just attached, but it doesn't have like a little attachment onto that, and the acorns do. Whereas the sessile oak is the opposite way around. They have leaf stalks, but the acorns don't. The acorns are just like completely attached. And oak trees, like oak woodlands, are one of the best woodlands for insect diversity, particularly, and animals in general. But a specific oak tree is like one of the best, or I can't remember which one the other one, it could be a willow. But yeah, it's one of the best trees for insect diversity. Okay, any guesses for this one? You have a look at the leaf. Looks like a flag of some kind. No?
Sycamore?
Yeah, it's a sycamore. So I kind of threw you off in a sense, but so it has that maple shaped leaf, like the Canadian flag, and it's got those helicopters that we all love throwing around, which are actually called samaras, or I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't actually know. Again, they're really long lived. They can live up to 400 years. I should say they're not native. They were introduced in the 1500s, I think I'm guessing from North America. But they kind of, naturalized. We generally accept them. Same with horse chestnut. We're generally quite happy to have them in the UK. So the bark starts out quite smooth, quite light in colour, but it does crack with age, almost like a camo type pattern, like camouflage pattern. And I've not put it in, but there is a tree called the plane tree, the London plane tree, which cracks in a similar way. And I think it is like in a similar family, or in the same family. And they're really common, but they are also introduced. But it's called London plane, and it's the most common species of tree in London. And they basically deal with pollution, which is why they were introduced and planted like across the country. And they deal with pollution by the bark peeling off, so the bark absorbs it and then peels off, which is really cool. Okay, any guesses for this one? So similar to the last one. Oh, okay. It's a field maple. So yeah, the leaves pretty similar to the sycamore. You can kind of see. Let me go back. Yeah, they're kind of that 5-lobed shape, but a lot smaller. Again, they've got the helicopters, but in the field maple they're a lot wider, whereas in the sycamore they're in like a V shape. So flowers are hermaphrodites. I'll go on to get this again in a minute, but that's like the standard flower that we expect. So a flower with male and female parts. It's like, the one you draw in your biology book, that kind of thing. Again, they're pretty long-lived, 350 years. So for quite a small tree, they do all right. They grow to about 20 meters. And I just put this picture of the yellow because they're one of my favorite trees in autumn. They have a really nice golden yellow leaf. It's really beautiful. Okay, any guesses for this one? This one is known as the Queen of the Forest, or Queen of the Woodland. So that's a beech. Simple leaves. They're quite hairy when they're younger. And they're wavy edge, so you can see like the way the light's bouncing off because it's almost wavy. So their seeds are beech nuts, which are encased like they just like look like little fluffy things. I think I used to get them confused with conkers, which they don't really look like, but so they're a lot fluffier looking than a conkers were quite spiky. Their flowers are monoecious, which I will explain in a second. And they have really dense canopy, so they've got quite a few rare plants associated with them because of that. One way I would say to identify them is their bark, again, it's similar to a young sycamore's bark. So it's this kind of smooth, pale bark, but they have this almost candelabra shape. So like, they put out branches there and then there. So it does look like in the autumn when, again, they're this like copper colour, it's really beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so here's to explain what I was going on about. So aecious refers to the Greek word, aecious is Greek for house. So when we say monoecious, it means one house. And when we say dioecious, it means two houses. And that's basically, you've got a female plant and a male plant on the tree, but on the same tree. And when they're dioecious, you've got a male flower on one tree and a female flower on another tree. So actually you can have a male tree and a female tree, which a lot of people don't realize. So it's possible if you only got one tree left and it's only a monoecious tree, then, or dioecious tree, then you might not have any more trees. I do think that happened. I think there's a ginkgo, which is a type of like I'm trying to think what the word is. I can't remember the word, but it's like but it's a tree basically, and it's in the Sheffield Botanical Gardens, and I think it's dioecious, and there's only one left. So yeah, they've not been able to breed it. Which is sad. So yeah, hopefully that explains whatever I was going on about before. Any guesses for this one? The berries might give it away.
Elder?
Yeah. So this is elder. So let me explain what I'm going on here. So pinnately compound. So a compound leaf is a leaf that has leaflets. So even though this looks like it's got 5 leaves, that's actually just one leaf with 5 leaflets. And then pinnate means that it's got pairs and then one at the top, one terminal leaf. So yeah, so it's pinnately compound, generally 5 leaflets, but sometimes 7. They're quite small trees, relatively short-lived as well, and then they're really interesting. I tried to find a photo of the bark and I just couldn't find a good one, which is sad, because they're really weird looking. Like, they basically just look dead. That's kind of how I explained it to my mum, and then she spots them everywhere now. So when they're older, they just like really ridged, look really dead, and then the younger ones are quite long and thin and they've got little spots on them. And the stems for those younger ones are really pithy. So if you see this picture on the far left here, all that stuff there, that's pith, and you can basically push that out with like a hand drill or a palm drill, and you can make elder beads. So that's how you do that. And it's believed that the name elder comes from the Anglo-Saxon word aeld, which means fire, and they think it's come from that because the Anglo-Saxons would remove the pith, use like a stick to get the pith out, and then use the elder stems to blow on the fire. So I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, so the berries are elderberries, used for cordial and jam and things. I think they're mildly poisonous, so you should cook them before you eat them. But I don't usually, so but yeah, just a warning. Yeah, I think you have to eat a lot to be poisoned. But yeah. And then this thing, which I had up before, is called the jelly ear fungus, and it's only grows on elder. So if you see that, then you know that it's elder. They do look like little ears. I think that one's dead. They're usually a bit more pinky. But yeah, they do like little ears and they're quite squishy. Okay, any guesses for this one? One of the most common trees in the UK. Oh, I can't hear you, Lydia. Okay, it's ash.
I was gonna say it, and then I saw Lawrence was gonna unmute himself. So then I was like, "Oh, go Lawrence!" And then Lawrence was like, "Oh, Lydia's unmuted."
Well, it's good that you knew. But yeah, so this is an ash tree. Again, the leaves pinnately compound. So 3 to 6 opposite pairs, so not 3 to 6 leaflets, 3 to 6 opposite pairs, and then one terminal at the top. Their seeds are ash keys. That's what they're called, keys. Kind of similar to the helicopters of the sycamores and stuff, but just with one wing essentially. Flowers are dioecious, so you get different male and female ash trees. However, you can get monoecious as well, so it's all very confusing. They're particularly struggling with ash dieback at the moment, which is a fungus called, not even going to attempt that word, but yeah, called that. And that basically essentially chokes the trunk, so the tree kind of gets starved of water and nutrients at the top, so they lose leaves and they start to die at the top. And actually, like a sign, so you can see here, like, it does obviously look like something's wrong, and it does. Ash is usually quite a grey colour, and then but when you see it quite brown, that's a sign of dieback. But what they will do, because it chokes this trunk at like a certain height, below that height, they, like a sign of dieback is they'll push out as many branches as they can. So they'll have lots of new growth at the bottom of the tree, as almost like a last resort. So yeah, that's kind of a sign that they're really coming to the end there, which is sad. Okay. Oh yeah, cool thing about ash is that their leaves fall in autumn while they're still green. So yeah, not sure why, but there we go. Okay, any guesses for this one?
Rowan?
Yeah. So it's also called mountain ash, but that's purely because of the leaf shape. They're not related. And it's called mountain ash because they're typically found in high altitude places. So that's why mountains in there. So pinnately compound leaves, but the leaves of the rowan are really serrated. So that's kind of one way to really separate them. And generally they've got more leaflets, but not always. So yeah, the serrated leaf edge is a big indicator. They have very bright red berries, very pretty. And the berries aren't like on a holly where they're kind of dispersed around. The berries are in big clumps. So yeah, like on this picture, you can see there are big clumps all around. So that's one way of telling it, the difference between, for example, this and hawthorn, which also has red berries. Yeah, and again, they're quite a relatively small tree. But they still live to about 200 years, which is pretty impressive. Oh no, I told you, but I guess you could. You could probably guess this one. Yeah, it's a holly. So this is an evergreen. So like I was talking before, they don't always have to have needle-like leaves. They can have big leaves, but they're usually really waxy, and that's one way of storing water. They've got really oval leaves, generally quite spiky. Flowers are dioecious, so they have male and female trees. And again, they've got red berries. But like I was saying, they're a lot more spread out over the tree. And these are also quite a small tree. Holly's a really interesting one. I was walking around my park before, collecting all these leaves that I'm going to show you in a minute. And there's just so many different holly trees, so many different shapes. So like we were saying last week, coppicing, you can coppice a holly tree, and that's when you cut it at the base quite low down and essentially make it into a bush. So a lot of times you'll see holly as a bush or rather than a tree, but when they are trees, they're actually really pretty. They can grow quite tall, 15 meters. And the berries are a really vital source of food for a lot of animals in the winter, particularly birds and small mammals. And the missel thrush has been known to guard the berries over the winter quite aggressively. So look out for that. Any ideas for this one? I did mention it before. There's a clue here where I say seeds are called
Hawthorn?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's got haws and it's thorny, so it's hawthorn. So the leaves of the hawthorn are actually really quite small. They're about this big. Again, quite lobed, but also toothed, which you can kind of see. But yeah, they're quite distinctive. they've got berries called haws with a W. And yeah, they're thorny, and they are often my dog's just walked in. They're often confused with blackthorn, but the flowers are slightly different, and blackthorn is quite unusual in that it flowers first. So that's kind of one way. If it's flowering early, then it's probably blackthorn. And then hawthorn, when that flowers, it's a sign that we're going into summer. That's kind of, in the olden days, that's how they said, like, oh, spring's finished and now it's summer, because the hawthorn flowers have come. Yeah, and there's another species of hawthorn called the Midland hawthorn that it often hybridizes with, and they look really similar, so I'm not sure how easy it is to tell when that happens or anything like that. Any guesses for this one? Again, there's a clue in what the seeds are. Yeah. It's hazel. So yeah, it produces hazelnuts. So that's where hazelnuts come from. Really like big oval leaves with a point. And I find sometimes it's usually like one point and then like two little ones, and then it goes round. So it's like usually like a little three. But again, quite serrated. There is a older, which I've not put in here, but older the leaf looks kind of similar, but doesn't have a point. So that's the way to tell the difference. Flowers are monoecious. So here's a really good example. So this catkin here, which is the male flower, in hazel's called like lamb's tail. That's the male part. That's the male flower. And then this tiny little red thing here, that's the female flower. But it is worth saying that in general, on monoecious trees, they can't pollinate each other, so it has to be another tree, and they'll have like ways of stopping self-pollination. So hazels are often coppiced, which I mentioned before, so cut low down, and that promotes regrowth. Particularly for hazel, it makes them last. So they usually live for about 80 years if they're not cut, but if they're coppiced, they can live for several hundred. So it does have a big effect. They're also coppiced like for habitat. So I think in the past, because humans have coppiced hazel, and there's a lot of birds that associate with that kind of dense, low to the ground habitat. So if we didn't coppice them, then that wouldn't happen, and then a lot of animals wouldn't have that habitat. So yeah, that's another reason we do it. The stems, once coppiced, are generally quite straight. So that's one way to tell. You can, when you see a hazel coppice, there's like a lot of straight stems and then these big leaves, and they're actually used for walking sticks. In the past, that's what hazel was used for, quite a lot. So if you've got an old walking stick lying around, it's probably hazel. Okay, so those are the ones I've done. And when I went walking with my dog before, I picked some leaves, and I've got some in here that I've not mentioned, and I've got some in here that I'm trying to throw you off with. So there's some trick ones in here. So you might want to unmute yourselves. But yeah, so we'll start with an easy one. Go on, Lawrence, what do you think?
I'll stick 'em more.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It might be, sorry, Olivia, it might be easier if you stop screen sharing.
Ooh, yeah, good idea. How do I do that? There we go. Okay, let's have a think. Okay.
Oh.
So it's got serrated edges. And it's
I'm going to say Rowan. No.
Yay!
Is it right? Oh,
Rowan. Okay, let's have a look.
Oh yeah.
go on, Lawrence.
Holly.
Yep, lovely. Oh, this is quite a. I thought I got 2 of this one. Don't know why it's so dark, but
You just
Ooh.
talked about why the light reflected on it as well. I
Yeah.
want to say hazel, but that's no.
It goes copper colour in autumn. Go on.
Beach.
Yeah.
Yes.
True. Yeah. Okay, do this one.
Oh.
Ooh. You might have it, Lawrence. Go on.
Yeah. Is it another holly?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So holly, generally we assume associate it with being spiky, but that's usually only the younger leaves. The leaves in the higher canopy of the tree generally look like this, like not spiky at all, and that's because the spikes are obviously, what's the word, costly, so they only produce them if they need to. So when they're young they need them because they're only young trees and they need to defend from predators, but as they get older and they're bigger, they don't really need them, unless you'll often see if it's been nibbled it will then get spikes, so it's like a response to predation as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's clever, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is one that wasn't in the thing, but it's quite a common trait. I'll give you a clue. It's the bark is usually quite stripy, like it has lines in it, the bark, and it produces seeds that are fruits.
Oh. I've gone blank.
It's a cherry. Cherry leaf, yeah. Yeah, so they have quite like elongated leaves. Okay, this one. Oh, compound leaf, smooth edges.
Is that my friend the ash?
It is, yay. We've done this one yet. King of the wood.
Is that the oak?
It is.
Yeah.
Nice and lobed. Okay, let's try this one. Oh.
Did you talk about this one?
I did. So it's oval. It's got a point. It's quite big.
Was it the one I said before when it wasn't? It was the beach.
Yeah.
Is it the hazel? Yeah.
Yeah. It's proper soft. Okay, this is another one that we didn't do, but it's like a very common tree.
Yeah. Silver birch.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's a catkin.
Yeah.
It's
common in my garden.
Yeah, so they're like the classic teardrop shape. That's generally how you can tell those ones. But then, what about this? Again, didn't discuss it, but
Hmm.
I found it in the park. So
Ah.
Shiny.
No, I was going to say it looks a bit like an ivy leaf, but it isn't, is it?
no,
It's not holly again.
no, it is shiny, but it's not evergreen.
Oh.
No.
It's not sort of a wayfaring tree or something like that.
It's a lime.
Oh.
Oh, right. I don't think I would have got that. I mean,
Yeah, it took me ages to figure out what they were. So.
I probably recognise the seed, but not the leaf. Yeah.
Okay, this one.
Is this one you talked about?
It's got berries.
Oh, is that another rowan?
No.
Or is it the elder?
Yeah, so that's elder. So it has less leaflets. But yeah, they are serrated edges, so I can see why you said rowan. Okay, last one.
Go on, Lawrence.
Hawthorn.
Yeah, that's hawthorn. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, in some places it's not even lobed, it's just like divided. But yeah, quite small leaf. Yeah, so I couldn't find every. Did I find every tree? Don't think I did. But yeah, so yeah, you did well.
That was really good. Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to recognise some of those out and about now.